When Melissa Avery was 10 years old, she saw her father's hand for the last time, sticking out of the window of a Chevrolet truck, thumb raised, calling out, "See you by the weekend." Even then, a chill had crept through the little girl. The northern woods looked darker than ever that autumn. Her father Alan's cheerfulness and her brother Jacob's excitement had always felt like a shield around them. But that day, it was as if the forest was getting ready to speak. On an early morning in October 1998, Alan Avery and his 9-year-old son Jacob loaded up their Chevy and set off into the wilderness of northern Maine. They packed a tent, an old fishing rod, 2 cans of beans, and Jacob's red Spider-Man boots. Before they left town, Melissa waved after them. Jacob rolled down the back window to stick his tongue out, and Alan, laughing as always, called back, "We'll be home before you know it." Melissa never saw them come home. That first night she waited. The second night, she grew impatient. On the third night, her aunt's phone rang. The police arrived, saying it was just a routine check. But Melissa would never forget the frozen look on her mother's face, the words whispered between her mother and her aunt, and the way an icy silence fell over the house. On the first day, the search parties were full of hope. Volunteers from every corner of town poured into the woods, shouting their names, beating through the underbrush, scouring little creeks. Helicopters swept overhead, divers plunged into icy ponds, dogs strained at their leashes, following faint scents. But nothing was found. A week passed, then a month, then winter came. Someone eventually said, "Maybe bears." Someone else, "The river must have carried them off." But deep down, Melissa knew that wasn't true. By the end of 1999, the case was officially closed. The investigation was stopped. The newspapers ran their last headline, "Tragic loss in Baxter Forest." Then even they fell silent. Melissa grew up. She left town. She started college, moved to another state, even changed her phone number. She didn't want to live with the ghosts of her father and brother, but some nights she would wake up certain she could hear the faint tapping of little Spider-Man boots in the dark. Then, in 2005, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the urgency in it was instantly recognizable to Melissa. "Ms. Avery?" "Yes?" "A vehicle was found during a hike in the Baxter area. A Chevrolet. The plates are unreadable, but inside we found documents." The voice paused. "A camping permit, dated 1998, and a pair of children's boots." The phone slipped from Melissa's hand and clattered to the floor. Her knees buckled. She couldn't answer the officer still calling. "Hello, Ms. Avery?" That week, for the first time in years, she returned to the town. The sign was still the same. Faded, cracked wooden letters. Melaninosa, Heart of the North. But now Melissa carried an old wound in her heart, and that wound had begun to ache again. Melissa stared at herself in the small mirror of the motel room at the edge of town. As she gathered her hair, she noticed her hands were still trembling. Beneath her chest, a weight she thought she'd forgotten, a cold, stone-like heaviness, settled there again. The officer on the phone had told her, "You need to see the vehicle," and the location had been marked in the file. Deep in the forest, along an unmarked ridge. That morning, the roads through the little town seemed colder than she remembered from childhood. As she passed the school, the echo of football games from her youth rang in her mind. Her father, the town's only blacksmith, used to sit in front of his shop, buying her and Jacob candy after the games. That shop now stood empty. A for sale sign hung crookedly on the door. When Melissa arrived at the sheriff's department, she was greeted by morning light slanting through broken shutters. The air inside still smelled of old coffee and rust. A young officer at the desk looked up and his face immediately turned serious. "Melissa Avery?" She nodded. "Detective Doyle has been expecting you." She walked down a long hallway. With every step, her heartbeat filled her ears. At last, a door to a small office opened. Inside was Karen Doyle. the same woman Detective Melissa had seen during the 1999 search. Her hair had turned grey, but her eyes were still steel. "Melissa," Karen said, extending her hand. "Wish it were under better circumstances." Melissa shook it. "The truck," she began, but her voice caught. Karen nodded and placed a file on the desk, opening it to reveal photographs. In the woods, almost completely covered by moss and branches, lay a Chevrolet. Its doors were rusted, windows cracked, the interior cloaked in shadow. "That's," Melissa's voice quivered, "my father's truck." Karen flipped to more photos, a close-up of the glove compartment where an old camping permit lay. Then another photo, a small red boot wedged beneath the back seat. Spider-Man's face still visible on it. Melissa's knees weakened, and she sank into the chair. Her hand covered her mouth as she whispered, "Jacob." Karen stayed silent, simply opening another section of the file. "The spot where the truck was found falls outside the 1998 search area," she said, "because back then there wasn't even a trail leading there. But—" her fingers traced the photographs. "We did search that area in '98, and this wasn't there." Melissa looked up. "So, someone moved it?" Karen lowered her gaze. "Yes, the truck was brought there sometime between 1999 and 2005. Until then, it wasn't there. And we found one more thing." Karen pulled a small envelope from under the desk. Inside was a faded photograph. A woman stood in front of a cabin, long dark hair, a denim jacket. But Melissa's eyes immediately drifted to the shadow behind her. In the doorway of the cabin, blurry and distant, stood a bearded man in a flannel jacket. His face older, beard longer, but those eyes. "My father," Melissa whispered. Karen nodded. "We think so too. There's a date written on the back. August 2002, nearly 4 years after they disappeared." Holding the photo between her fingers, Melissa felt the room go silent around her. An icy fear coursed through her veins. "So, they were alive?" Karen nodded slowly. "At least one of them was." Then, Melissa drew a deep breath, studying the photo. The man standing in the doorway no longer looked like a ghost of the forest. He looked like a father who wanted to come home. "And the woman?" Melissa asked. Karen opened the envelope again. "Unidentified, no records matched, but we do have one lead. In 1998, Alan mentioned he was meeting someone, a woman. Her name was June." Melissa nodded. "Yes, he mentioned her during his last phone call. Said there was a woman living in a cabin along the way." Karen closed the file and stood. "Then," she said, her voice firm, "that's where we start." Melissa rose as well. In that moment, all the guilt, longing, and anger she'd carried for years gave way to a single feeling: determination. The silence of the forest that had always followed her no longer scared her, because now she had a map. And it began in her father's eyes. Melissa and Karen set out before dawn the next morning. They carried only old topographic maps, a GPS device, the photograph of the cabin, and a can of marking spray. The truck was waiting outside the sheriff's department. A rusty Jeep, nearly as tired as Alan's Chevrolet, but still standing. The air changed as soon as they entered the forest roads. Mist drifted slowly between the trees. Branches overhead tangled together, almost completely blotting out the sky. Karen studied the map as she spoke. "This place, it's far beyond any marked trails. Back in '98, it wasn't even on the maps. It still isn't." Melissa stared out the windshield, trying to conjure the cabin from memory. That small crooked roof structure she'd seen behind the woman in the photograph, hidden in the shadows. "If someone lived here," Melissa said, "and saw my father and Jacob, why didn't they tell anyone?" Karen's lips pressed thin. "Maybe they didn't want to, or couldn't." After nearly 2 hours of jarring, rough travel, they stopped. The road had vanished entirely. They would have to walk. Melissa slung her backpack over one shoulder and looked up. The tree trunks rose like pillars all around them, and the forest seemed to listen in silence. At first, they searched for signs, marks where the truck might have been dragged, broken branches, old camp remains. But everything looked new. The forest had healed itself. After a while, Karen pointed ahead. "There," she said. Melissa's heart lurched. Sure enough, between the trees, there it was. A moss-covered, decaying sign, just like the photo, only more battered, darker. Her breathing quickened as they approached. She slowed her steps, feeling as though something might spring from behind the door at any second. Karen placed her hand on the grip of her gun and gave Melissa a slight nod. Melissa took the first step, moving to the door. The wood groaned. Hinges wailed. Inside it was dark, but warm and strange. Old bookcases, a rusty stove, the remains of burned candles, maps pinned to the walls, magazines with pages missing, and in the center of the floor, a metal box dusted over. Melissa crouched, reached carefully, and lifted the lid. Dozens of photographs spilled out. She sifted through them one by one. Some were happy camping scenes, men fishing, women gathered around a fire. But then came the others. A photo of Jacob, exhausted, dirty, eyes hollow. Another of Alan, bearded, gaunt, standing in the cabin doorway holding an axe. Karen sank to her knees, staring at the photos. "Oh God," she whispered. Melissa covered her face with her hands. The familiar light in her father's eyes, but her son was completely gone. Karen began rifling through the shelves on the wall. When she opened a drawer, she found a half-torn notebook. No name on the cover, but some pages were still legible. Karen handed it to Melissa. "Look," she said. Melissa flipped through the pages. The writing was erratic, barely any punctuation, like a child's handwriting. "Don't talk when he's here. He listens at night. I want to go home. I want to see my sister. He looks through the trees. They say he's gone, but he's not. June can't protect anymore. I don't trust anymore." Melissa's hands began to shake. Jacob. It must have been Jacob who wrote this. Karen slowly nodded. So, they were kept here, and someone was watching them. Maybe the one hiding them wasn't the same as the one watching. Melissa let the notebook fall into her lap, covering her mouth with her hand. "And the woman, June?" she whispered. Karen glanced around. "She stayed here, but why did she leave? Or was she made to?" Just then, Melissa noticed a small carving on the windowsill, scratched into the wood with a knife. A crescent moon, and beneath it, two small stick figures holding hands. Melissa touched the carving with her fingertips. Jacob and Nora's story was only just beginning. By the time they left the cabin, the sky had completely closed over, and a heavy rain had begun. Drops drummed against the rotting wood, and the wind snapped branches overhead. Melissa clutched the notebook tightly to her chest, her eyes still fixed on the crescent moon and the two little figures carved into the window frame. That mark Jacob had etched with his own hands. It was a cry for help, but also a kind of guide. "Find us," it seemed to say. "Don't give up." As Karen opened the Jeep's trunk, she spoke. "These marks, they're deliberate, and far too detailed for just a child." "Maybe he wasn't alone," Melissa finished. Karen nodded. As they drove back along the forest roads, Melissa's eyes stayed on the edges, scanning tree trunks. Maybe there were more clues. And sure enough, just a few 100 meters ahead, Karen hit the brakes. "Look," she said, pointing. On the trunk of a tree, glistening with rain, there it was again, the crescent symbol. Below it, 4 vertical lines scratched into the bark. Melissa approached, touching the marks lightly with her fingertips. "This is different," she murmured. "Yes," Karen said, "but still Jacob's line. Notice, the 4th mark is deeper than the others." Melissa looked up into the darkness of the forest. "It means something," she said. Karen pulled a piece of chalk from her pocket, circled the symbol, and snapped a photo. "We're marking the trail," she said. "If we have to come back, we'll know where we were." They walked on for a while longer, and the symbols multiplied. Sometimes crescents, sometimes stick figures, all leading in the same direction. An hour later, deep in the forest, they reached a clearing. It was an abandoned old hunting camp. A ring of burned stones, broken chairs, moss-covered barrels. Melissa spotted something on the ground. "Here too," she said. Between the stones, half buried, was a piece of paper. She reached out and pulled it free. The rain had thinned it to the point of transparency, but the writing was still legible. "If you can't find us, look to the water knows." Her throat tightened. Karen knelt beside her, studying the paper. "It sounds crazy, but actually, it makes sense. In the woods, water is always a clue. Children stay near streams. The water leads them." Melissa nodded. "My father, he taught Jacob that. No matter what, find a stream and follow it." Karen unfolded her map and pointed. "There's a stream nearby, runs southeast. A part of the forest that was never searched. Let's try there." The rain made their walk harder. The ground turned to mud, rocks grew slick. But Melissa forced herself forward, suppressing her fear. With every step she imagined Jacob's little footprints ahead of her, childish hope that at any moment, behind any rock or branch, a new sign of him would appear. Half an hour later they heard it. First a faint trickle, then a rushing whisper. A stream emerged from between the trees. Its banks were lined with mossy stones, its water murky and fast. Melissa crouched at the water's edge, plunging her hands in, cold but clean. Then her eyes caught something, half buried in the mud on the bank. A glove, small, red, with a Spider-Man logo. Melissa held her breath and with trembling hands pulled it free. "Jacob," she whispered. Karen came over, bending to look. "It's his, isn't it?" Melissa nodded. "He was here. He passed through here. But there was more. Just a few feet farther, hidden among the moss, was a small pile of stones." Karen slipped on gloves and began to lift them one by one. Beneath was an old, rusted metal tin, the words etched into it, barely legible. "Run." Karen pried it open. Inside were a few fragments, a broken bracelet, a handful of small, childlike drawings on paper, and a piece of fabric with the name Nora stitched into it. Melissa's eyes widened. "Nora," she said. Karen glanced at her. "The other child." Melissa nodded. "Jacob wrote about her in the notebook, said, 'She's gone, but maybe she's still here.'" Karen unfolded one of the papers, a crescent and two figures, but this time an arrow pointed east. "They're guiding us," Karen said. Melissa stared at the drawing for a long moment. "It could be a map." Karen nodded. "Then we go east." The farther east they went, the denser and quieter the forest became. Now there was only the sound of branches breaking underfoot. Then Melissa stopped. Something had moved. Someone was watching. Karen noticed too. She put her hand on her gun. "Someone's there," she murmured. Melissa scanned the shadows, her heart pounding. "I can't see them." Just then, about 20 meters ahead, a shape slipped through the trees. Tall, black, face obscured, but definitely someone. Melissa's breath came out in a cold cloud. "Could it be?" Karen whispered. "Maybe someone's still here. Someone hunting them." Melissa gripped the notebook tighter. "Are they watching us or letting us through?" Karen fixed her eyes on the darkness. "Whatever it is," she said firmly, "we keep going." They walked another hour. By then, the sun was sinking and darkness began to swallow the forest. But when they emerged into a small clearing, they both froze. In front of them, a collapsed cabin, and beside it, a fire still smouldering. No one in sight. but the fire was alive, breathing smoke. Melissa and Karen exchanged a look. "He was here," Melissa said. Karen scanned the area carefully. "Maybe still here," she whispered. Melissa crept closer. At the fire's edge lay a freshly placed note. Raindrops had speckled it, but the words were still clear. "Find me. He's still watching, but I'm still running." Melissa's hands trembled as she read, a spark of hope flaring deep in her chest. Jacob was still alive. Karen looked around, eyes sharp. "This is his handwriting. He must be close, very close." As Melissa watched the smoke curl upward, another shadow slipped through the depths of the forest. But this time, she didn't feel fear, because now she knew Jacob was still watching, and she wouldn't stop until she found him. After finding the note by the fire, Melissa and Karen exchanged a silent look. The possibility that Jacob was still alive filled them with both hope and an icy fear, because it also meant the shadow that had held, hidden, or hunted him was still here too. Karen leaned toward her radio, hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Base, 1013, sending coordinates, requesting backup team." Soon, the rain intensified, hammering down as the shadows between the trees deepened. But Melissa didn't stop moving. She quickened her steps eastward, the direction Jacob's map and signs had shown. About half an hour later, they came upon a massive rock outcrop. Pressed against the stone wall was another half-collapsed cabin. The ground outside was dotted with footprints, fresh footprints. Karen drew her gun and moved ahead. "Careful," she whispered. Melissa's heart was pounding out of her chest. With each step, her knees weakened, her breath hitched. As they neared the doorway, they saw a figure moving inside, tall, hunched. Melissa suddenly lunged forward, kicking the door open. "Stop!" she shouted. The man flinched and turned his face away. Karen quickly pinned him against the wall. "Show me your hands." The man raised his hands. He was thin, old. His beard was tangled, his eyes bloodshot. Melissa stepped closer, trembling as she asked, "Where is Jacob?" He didn't look at her. He only shook his head. "You were meant to find me, and now you have." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse and broken. "I was his voice. I kept him, because if he hadn't run, they would have taken them all." Melissa lunged, grabbing him by the collar and shaking him. "Where is Jacob? Is he alive?" The man closed his eyes and smiled faintly. "It took too long, but now that you're here, we can finally rest." Then he slowly lifted his arm and pointed to a hatch behind the cabin. Melissa and Karen ran to it. The wooden cover creaked as they opened it. Below was a dark tunnel. Damp, cold air rose to meet them. Karen switched on her flashlight and descended first. The ladder led down to a narrow space. At the bottom, they found a small room. Dozens of crescents and stick figures were carved into the walls. And in the center of the room, Jacob, crouched, clutching a broken toy. His hair was white, his eyes cloudy and deep, but he was alive. Melissa froze for a moment. Then she dropped to her knees and wrapped him in her arms. "Jacob! Oh God, Jacob!" The boy slowly placed his hands on her face. "You found me," he whispered. "I knew you would." Melissa couldn't hold back her tears. "You're safe now," she said, but Jacob shook his head. "No," he said. "He's still here." Melissa and Karen exchanged a glance. At that moment, footsteps echoed from deep in the tunnel. Karen immediately raised her gun. "Who's there?" From the shadows, someone emerged. Slowly, heavily, a man in a flannel jacket, bearded, his face still obscured. The same man from the photographs. But his face still wasn't visible. Melissa pulled Jacob behind her. "What do you want?" she shouted. The man stepped closer. Jacob suddenly screamed, "Stop him! He keeps coming. He never stops. Karen fired. The bullet struck the wall. The man didn't flinch. Then Jacob fumbled in Melissa's pocket and dropped a box of matches. Inside was a scrap of paper. Melissa picked it up. In shaky handwriting it read, "Fire. Only fire stops him." Melissa's eyes darted to the corner of the room, an old fuel canister and a few torches. She and Karen locked eyes. "Ready?" Melissa asked. Karen nodded. They lit the torch, poured the fuel across the floor. The man was only a few feet away now. Melissa scooped Jacob into her arms and hurled the torch to the ground. Flames roared to life instantly. The man let out a strange, sharp sound, almost a scream, then disappeared into the smoke. As the tunnel blazed, Melissa and Karen climbed back up with Jacob. When they emerged from the cabin, the sky had cleared, the mist had lifted, the sun was rising. Melissa clutched the boy tighter. Jacob was still out of breath, but no longer afraid. Behind them, the cabin collapsed in flames. Melissa lifted her head, meeting Jacob's eyes. "It's over now," she said. Jacob nodded. "It's over." Karen came up beside them, resting a hand on Melissa's shoulder. "All these years, you fought for this, and you did it." Melissa stroked Jacob's hair. "You did it," she said to him. "You never stopped." As they walked away from the forest, the birds began to sing again. Sunlight shimmered through the branches. When they reached the road, police vehicles were waiting. Officers rushed forward, wrapping Jacob in a blanket. Melissa turned back for one last look at the forest. For a moment, she thought she still saw the man in the shadows, but only for a moment. Then the shadow dissolved. Melissa took a deep breath and closed her eyes. In her arms, Jacob fell asleep, safe. As they walked on, the forest watched them in silence. But this time, there was a peace in that silence. The secrets that had been hidden for years were finally brought to light. The screams in the silence had been heard, and the signs Jacob had left behind had finally led her home. A few months later, Melissa returned to the town. With Jacob's notebook, the photos, and his journal, she handed everything over to the authorities. The body in the tunnel was officially recorded as an unidentified man, but to Melissa, it didn't matter who he was. What mattered was that Jacob was alive. That night, she tucked Jacob into his own bed and looked out the window. The forest was still there, dark and deep. But she wasn't afraid anymore, because now she was Jacob's voice, Nora's voice, the voice of everyone who had been lost. And quietly, she whispered to the night, "You're free now."